Hello everyone, my name is Gabriel Alexander Paltitijono. I am currently a student in Universitas Erlangga and I'm majoring in data science and technology. Today, I'm going to speak about the topic of ethics in the digital age. Over the last few decades, we can definitely see that the world has entered into something known as the digital age. Now, in this digital age, new opportunities, huge ones, pop out and rise out. Why? Because data collection is a lot easier due to the internet. The internet makes it so that we are able to easily access information anywhere in the world anytime we want to in an instant. But with these opportunities also come new ethical challenges. These are what we are going to discuss today, and it's also what is discussed and researched by Matthew J. Salganik in his paper Bit by Bit Social Research in the Digital Age. These challenges could be divided into two problems. The first being privacy violations and unethical experiments, and the second being important research being blocked by ethical or legal uncertainty, where it's just treading on the line. It's not unethical, but it's not fully ethical. These challenges are mainly dominated by two different fields, the first being social scientists and the second being data scientists. Let's look at the social scientists' point of view. First, social scientists, they rely on IRBs and rules. Meanwhile, data scientists often improvise with no formal ethics training. Social scientists, they prioritize humanity, they prioritize the human nature and ethics, while data scientists, they thrive for something, they thrive to gain this thing by gaining these data to hopefully improve the lives of humans, but the process might be kind of unethical. See, there's a solution to these problems, which is called the principles-based approach. They're comprised of 4 points. The first being respect for people, the second being beneficence, the third being justice, and the fourth being respect for law and public interest. Basically, it combines both fields, the social scientists and the data scientists, and try to find the best in between point. The principles based approach is also supported by two people and two reports, basically. The first being the Bellman report made in 1979, and also the Menlo report, which is more recent in 2011. See, basically in this chapter, we also talk about two ethical frameworks, which is basically consequentialism, which means ends justify means. Basically, if it's for the greater good, then the process is justified. The second being deontology, which means means must be ethical regardless of ends. Even if it's for the greater good, we can't just do something unethical or like something not 100% correct, even if it's for the greater good. Before moving on to the theory, let's talk about 3 times where ethical concerns popped out in previous experiments. First of all, in 2012, Facebook led this experiment where 700,000 users of their app was put unknowingly inside an experiment. Basically, in this experiment, Facebook filtered posts, and with these filtered posts, they showed them to these 700,000 users and to see if emotions do spread online. Now, with no consent and no ethical review from a third party, when word got out about the experiment, there was massive backlash, and basically Facebook had to stop doing the experiment. As a result, companies still run experiments, but they try to keep them hidden, so no backlash happened. Next, in 2006, Harvard researchers scraped Facebook profiles and then merged them with university records to study social networks, and then they shared that dataset. Now, when other researchers studied these datasets, they recognized that these datasets were made by Harvard, which then caused the privacy breach accusations, and then it got out to the public media, and then there was a media outrage, which prompted the researchers to remove the dataset permanently. Lastly, Georgia Tech in 2014 secretly made browsers that visit censored sites. Now, lastly, in 2014, Georgia Tech researchers wanted to measure internet censorship in worldwide in real time. See, how they did this was they made a small code snippet that website owners could add to their pages. So when someone visits their page with that snippet, their browser will silently try to access another site, basically opening another site and opening another website without the consent of the user. And basically, the browser then reported back whether the site was accessible or censored. For a user, this was invisible, of course, because the snippet was from the website. And basically, this caused ethical issues like how people in repressive countries could be put at risk if their computer tried to visit certain sites without their knowledge. And well, of course, the obvious, the users had no consent. Basically, as an outcome to this, again, media outrage, a lot of stuff went down, and the paper was then published at a major computer science conference about this research, but with a special ethical warning statement attached, something that had never been done before. This sparked debate in the computer science community about what counts as ethical research online. Now, previously I mentioned how all of this was caused because of how the world turned and entered the digital age. Now, why is it so different? Because we're in the digital age compared to back then. See, digital research has a massive scale compared to physical research. It has more power than an analog. Researchers can observe or experiment without consent or awareness of the users and the people using the internet. So the risk of secondary use also appears, where basically this data that they obtain can be used later on for a separate experiment or different experiment that the users they don't consent to. And basically the norms in the digital age are kind of inconsistent because privacy in the internet is still a debate. And basically, the bottom line is researchers face power and unclear rules, which leads to ethical uncertainty. Like, how much power should they have when collecting data? And what are the rules that should confine these researchers? In the previously mentioned Bellman report and Menlo report, four principles were suggested, which is respect for people, beneficence, justice, and respect for law and public interest. Now, basically, these principles are what should guide researchers on their research. Basically, you have to respect people. You have to think about what they would want, and you have to inform them about the research and also ask for their consent. Second, for beneficence, you need to be able to maximize gains, benefits, and also minimize harm done, unethicals. And then third, justice. You need to be able to distribute fairly the risks and the benefits. And then lastly, respect for law and public interest. You need to be able to comply with the rules. Just like with the social scientists and the data scientists I mentioned before, comes two frameworks, basically representing each field. First of all, there's a framework named consequentialism. Basically, we focus on the results. No matter what happens during the process, as long as we gain a net positive on the results of the research, then it's okay to not think about the ethics. The second framework is deontology, where basically we have to focus on the process and that some actions are always wrong, which is basically some actions are always unethical and we should always avoid them during the process. Now, you might mention which framework is better. The answer, none, because we have to find the perfect mix between both of them where we can maximize our gains and then also minimize the harms done with our research. Now, along with those four principles that we learned and the two frameworks that we must combine, we now have four mainly challenging areas where data collection and information collection data scientists still have problems with. And first of all, informed consent. Basically, we need to gain the consent of the users, or we should try to gain the consent of the users. But in the internet, it's really hard to contact the users in the first place, because you can message them, you can email them. There's no guarantee that they'll even see it, let alone reply to it or comply to it. Second, there are also informational risk. Basically, there could be risks of leaks from the data set that you've gained, from the data collection that you've gained, and also re-identification and reputational harm. Because again, this data, we're talking about what people do online. And third, privacy. Kind of similar to the second one. Basically, these users need to stay anonymous, but re-identification could happen. And also, data online is persistent, searchable, and always linkable, where data is permanent. It's digital footprint. You can't delete it once it's on the internet. It's going to be there forever. Lastly, decision making under uncertainty. When faced with rules that kind of bind you, but they also don't, and they kind of worry you, can you really make the correct decision? Now, the four principles before help with the gray areas, but they don't cover every single situation and every single possibility. Now, you might think, how is all these ethical concerns and data collection in the digital era relevant to Indonesia? Well, first of all, Indonesia is the third most populated country in the world, which means lots of users, lots of data. And when you're trying to do your own research in the future, when we're trying to do our own research in the future, we have to keep some things in mind. Basically, some data might contain personal information, and there are concerns about the surveillance and privacy of these data. Like, for example, eKTP, health apps, fintech, these are very prevalent in Indonesia, and they contain data that is very personal. And there are some concerns like privacy breaches and data breaches, where your data sets, your data collection is leaked or breached by a third party, like what happened to Tokopedia or BPJS in the past, where there are weak safeguards to your data sets, to your data collection, and maybe it got leaked by someone else, and these causes a lot of concerns. Next, there are a lot of social media influence in Indonesia, basically, just like TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, you name it, social media. As you know, there are a lot of concerns about privacy there as well. And also, when doing research, try not to do something like what Facebook did in 2012, where you need to get their consent if you really want to do your experiment or your research on those applications. Next, there are also legal apps, not apps. I'm sorry, legal gaps in the Indonesian law, where basically the newest law, PDP law in 2022, is new and the enforcement is still unclear. Basically, a lot of gray areas, lots of gray areas, and with gray areas comes a lot of debates, a lot of concerns. Basically, yeah, like I said, those four principles that I told you before, and that was researched by the author, will help. And helping isn't really curing or fixing it. So again, that is how it's relevant to Indonesia. And along with those concerns, there are future directions that we need to do in Indonesia. Basically, we need to make stronger consent standards, where basically the consent standards, they're clear, concise, precise, and simple, so that people know that people will know and they will consent, or maybe not consent, doesn't matter. Basically, people will know because it's simple and they can understand it easier. Next, there should also be risk assessment protocols where basically prior to doing researches or experiments, there should be a risk assessment either by a third party or by protocol like mentioned. And the next, privacy by design. Basically, into these systems of applications or sites, there needs to be protections built. That's self-explanatory. And the next, digital ethic boards. Basically, like the IRB I mentioned before with the social scientists. Uh, there's a board that determines what is ethical or unethical. Next, legal clarity. Basically, the PDP law, like I said before, still has a lot of gray areas and blind spots. We need to update it consistently with every single spaghetti code in it. Next, public awareness. We need to educate citizens on their rights and their risks on being online, and how they can consent or disconsent, and also, you know, about the risks about leaks, about your data being online, about your privacy. And lastly, we need to be able to balance innovations and rights. Human rights are important, but so are innovations. So we need to find the middle point where we can prioritize both at the same time. Now, I've talked about how it can influence Indonesia. Now let's talk about how it can influence students in Indonesia. For example, I am a student in science technology, Universitas Erlangga, like I told you before, and I'm planning on doing my paper on measuring algorithmic influence on social media engagement. Basically, I want to be able to know how much of an effect does the algorithm have on the user's behavior. And I mean, like the details are probably like something like collecting data sets from uh, social medias with like those infinite scrolling methods like Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. You know, like how you can infinitely scroll. And basically, I I'll probably prioritize something like TikTok and Instagram Reels mainly because they take more of your attention because uh, it's like short term uh, post right which you scroll to. And basically in this experiment, the ethical concerns that pop up, think about it, is probably something like consent, again a consent, because the data set is uh, about users on these apps, and I might not have their consent, or like I don't know where I'm getting these data sets from yet. But for example, if I'm taking it from the internet, I don't know if these data sets are taken with the user's consent. But if I'm doing it myself, then maybe I'm able to confirm the consent, the consensual state of the user. Next, there's also psychological impact. Basically, I if I try to show certain feeds to these users, I may be able to affect them emotionally, like influence their emotions or opinions or even their views on life. And basically, that's not something I or anyone should be doing. Next, again, privacy. If I'm personally collecting their data, and if it's personal data, then I risk exposing that personal information when doing the experiment. And then lastly, transparency. Basically, if the results are published from my experiment, the experiment I plan on doing, not that I've already done it, the participants should be able to know how their data was used and the role of the data that I took from them in this experiment. Because if they don't know how I'm using this data, how are they supposed to know if I'm using it wrongly? That's about it. That's about everything from me. Thank you for listening about this topic about ethical concerns in the digital era, and basically uh, data collection, and thanks a lot for the author, which is the author of Bit by Bit Social Research in the Digital Age, to Mr. Matthew J. Salganik for this paper, and it is very informative and very helpful. That is about it. Thank you for listening.